Hello, I'm David Ray, and in this Revisto training session, we'll be talking about model management from a design perspective. So initially, what I want to point out here, I'll go ahead and start in Revit. So I do want to start at, just setting up the export view. We always like to recommend a dedicated 3D export view. So what does that mean for your model in terms of managing that? So initially, if you have a 3D view, sometimes rendering views are really good for this, but if you have a 3D view where everything is turned on, where you have it just set to where only the critical things you want to coordinate on are displayed in the model, that's sort of the goal. So anything, just as a rule of thumb, anything displayed or turned on in Revit will transfer to Revisto once you export. So if for example, if I have things turned on and off in visibility graphics, maybe I have a filter set up in this view. So just to ensure that you're getting the same thing at each update, go ahead and set up a Revisto 3D export view. Another thing that we've found helpful, just in terms of setting up that export view, is having a section box turned on. Right, which isn't entirely necessary, but something we like to point out because there might be things that you've set to the side in the model that you don't want to come into a coordination model. Eliminating the need for those would be the idea there. Another thing pretty critical to the export view is the detail level. So make sure your detail level is set to fine. And where that's going to help is any of those fine line items or really tight diameter objects that come over upon export from Revit to Revisto, just making sure they make it into the export. Otherwise, Revisto has a hard time reading those if your detail level is set to coarse, for example. So make sure that's set to fine. And you should be ready to export. Another thing that I want to point out here is the levels. So within this export view, you can go into your visibility graphics overrides, right? Go into your annotation categories and come down here to levels and grids. And for example, if you have a linked model, say structural, for example, that's coming in and you want to export that all out in a container file, sometimes the levels do get overwhelming when they come into Revisto. So for example, in structural, sometimes they might have, top of foundation or top of steel, things like that. And really only all you want to do in terms of navigation and referencing those levels in a coordination view is, maybe only the architectural levels are, important there. So something to keep in mind if you want to turn levels off in this view, and maybe you want to save off a version of this model that only has the levels you want to display in Revisto, that's certainly an option. So I could come in here, turn levels off, I hit apply, I hit OK. You'll notice the levels go away, and going back to our rule of thumb, again, only the levels that are displayed in this view will come over to Revisto. So I also want to talk about, that's going to pertain to a container file export. So if I switch gears a little bit and talk about a separate Revit file export. So the important thing to consider here would be to ensure each file, has the correct background information. So if I have a Revit systems file linked in and it's, not hosted correctly or not pathed correctly to have the architectural backgrounds, that would be the idea. So make sure that things are linked together appropriately if you're going to push separate models. So a lot of times what we'll see is maybe the mechanical model gets pushed separately from the architectural model, but the mechanical model lost a link, right, in the process. So when that mechanical model's sheets come into Revisto, it loses those architectural backgrounds that make the sheets kind of, a little bit unuseful, especially for coordination. So the idea there is to just make sure everything's linked together appropriately, and you can push as many different exports from other files, other softwares into one Revisto project as needed. Just some considerations to be noted. I also, as far as model management, there's something else I want to point out. So for example, say I have a 3D view here, and we're just, going to take a brief insight into our systems. One thing that a lot of clients like to see is their systems have sort of a color coding to them, right? So maybe return air has one color, exhaust air has another color, supply air, for example, has another color in their mechanical systems, and they want to bake that into the Revisto project. So one way to accomplish this is with filtering. So if I go into visibility graphics here, look at filters. So for example, I have a supply air Revisto filter set up here. And what I did is, just got into my filter list, turned mechanical on, highlighted anything I wanted to include there, and actually I'll go into the filter itself. Excuse me a second. Oh, where'd it go? Here we go, supply air. So again, mechanical filtered, anything I wanted to include in that filter. Set up a quick rule here. There's really no, tried and true way to do this. It's really at your discretion. In this example, I used a system classification equals supply air. Hit OK, and then from there, we'll make sure it's visible. And the key here is to turn your patterns to solid fill and then assign the necessary color. And then once that's set, I would just include that filter in my export view, hit apply, hit OK, and then anything I've color coded in that filter will come into Revisto. So from there, you're ready to export. So I'll go into the Revisto Export dialog here briefly and just point a few things out as it relates to model management. So we'll just create a new project for this example. Again, selecting the 3D model view. So I can come down here to my Revisto Export view, make sure that's selected. You'll want to export viewpoints if needed. This can be another one that can be overwhelming if there's a lot of 3D views or camera views set up in the project. We can definitely exclude that. As mentioned, we can bring the levels in or choose not to. If we want to push, a container file and it has mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, structural, architectural all loaded and is exporting in one push, it might be an option or consideration to take if you want to save off a file, or maybe only the architectural gets exported with the levels turned on in visibility graphics. We can update materials, use rendered appearance. So the example I just showed regarding including a filter within the 3D view. So to get that to work, you'll need to untick the use rendered appearance. Otherwise, it's going to bring in the basic, rendered Revit pipe material, or however it deciphers that. So make sure that's unticked, and it will bring any filters assigned to this view into Revisto. Export grids, export rooms, phases, and we can also export point clouds. And then when we get into exporting sheets, so this is where we can choose any of the sheets brought into the project. We can also include, if there's, for example, a sheet set within your plot settings in the Revit file. So we can choose the set, and maybe we take this a step further, go back to our plot settings, and this is set Revisto architectural. something along those lines. So it's really easy to identify, and we're bringing, again, the correct information every time we update. If you are pushing a container file, if I get down to export sheets from linked files, we can tick that on, and it's going to bring in, and if I come back up here and filter for all, it'll bring in and read in any of those sheets that were within that linked file. And again, this is important to note. I mean, if you're bringing in sheets from linked files and maybe some of the background information just wasn't pathed correctly, it might be something to consider a separate export from some of your consultant models. Other than that, export sheets from linked files, merge similar sheets from different files. These are the two main ones to focus on. Make sure those are ticked on. Hit save. And then obviously the positioning becomes important. So by shared coordinates, origin to origin, project base point to base point. And the same would apply to other authoring softwares. I mean, SketchUp, Rhino, ArchiCAD, Vectorworks, things like that. You'll want to pay attention to the positioning, especially as it relates to bringing all those models together. If you're trying to line up a model from Vectorworks to Revit, make sure there's some point from the origin of Vectorworks to the project base point or survey point within Revit that you're aligning to, and picking the same thing, same thing each time as it relates to positioning. So I think for today, that's really what I wanted to cover. Hopefully that's all clear. And if not, we're here to help anytime. Feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.